All right, hello everyone, and welcome. It is Monday, September 9th, and welcome to the first live class back from Hurricane Dorian. Sorry we had to kind of put the live classes on pause last week between the Labor Day holiday and the impending storm that really didn't do all that much here through Central Florida. Obviously, other parts around the world are much more impacted by the storm, and I haven't heard anybody message me that they were impacted or it created any sort of challenge for them during this past week, but please reach out to me if you're having any sort of issue with getting started on the class and getting underway. But moving beyond that, we are here at the beginning of week 2. You have finished out the first round of assignments. You have worked on the 2D platformer game, creating all of the music and sound effects for that. And we're going to spend the first part of class today going through a couple of submissions that we received. Each week on FSO, you do have a weekly feedback and peer review assignment that is completely optional, but highly encouraged, and hopefully after seeing this first round of feedback, it encourages other folks to participate, because while it's all well and good to get feedback on your own session, and everybody will receive a video feedback, feedback video, I guess, better way of saying that, to comment and give suggestions on revisions and different approaches. But I think that seeing everybody else's submissions and seeing everybody else's approach to completing this assignment is equally, if not more, valuable, because you are going to see all sorts of different ideas, good things that you should try, and bad things that you might want to avoid, and more than likely things that you never even considered in your own composition. So the more people that submit and participate, the better it is for everybody, because we get to comment on a wider variety of compositions and approaches to the project. So we have 3 submissions for today, and we'll spend the first part of our class going through these, and then we'll turn it over to the archive in the second part, where we discuss the new assignments for week 2. We have a new game and a new approach to the music, a new genre and aesthetic to the overall game, new requirements from the music, new instrumentation, new compositional approaches, all sorts of different aspects. But the actual assignments and production process is going to be very similar. You are going to create a series of WAV files for a particular game and create all of the music and sound effects. So by the end of week 2, you will have all of the assets created for both games. I do want to point out that we have the opportunity for revision as we do feedback here each week, and as you get your comment and feedback videos, but even more so once you actually put everything into the game, you'll probably realize some tweaks and changes that can be made all the way throughout the month, and so you have the opportunity to make those changes before the final project delivery at the end of the month. So we want to make sure that everybody gets an opportunity to submit and has the opportunity for peer review and feedback, and then has the opportunity to revise everything to really create the strongest projects possible as you kind of finish out the class and heading into final project. We want you to be building out portfolios and demo reels and having a way to show off all of the work and all the material that you have done. So, so by the end of week 2, you will have created all of the assets that you need for both games. Then we'll head into week 3, where we take all of your music and sound effects and start talking more about the technical side of things, of how things are actually going to work in the game. We will use software called Wise to actually get your music and sound effects working in the game. And we will take the opportunity to probably reveal some things that need to changes that might need to be made, and you'll still have the opportunity to fix all of that all the way through week 4. So that is generally where we're at and where we are headed overall. I'm going to take some time to just kind of give an overview of the 2D platformer assignment again, give insight into what we're listening for, the types of things that we should be listening for in the intros, the main loops, and the endings. We have 3 submissions here. Each student submission, you have your own track. We have all of your these are the 3 main loop files over here, the 3 8-bar main loops. We also have the 3 2-bar intros and the 3 2-bar endings. So I'll take some time here to kind of talk about it as a whole, talk about, again, what we're listening for, and then we will get into listening to each one of them. So let's see. Let's start out with the main loops, because this will be the majority of the music that the player will hear, or this is what they're going to be hearing most often while they play their game, and then it also kind of informs us what to pay attention to going from the intros into the main loops and the endings, resolving the main loops. All right. So, 3 8-bar main loops. First and foremost, the loops need to loop. There should be no pops or clicks, no gaps in the playback, and all of these visually look good, where they are going to seamlessly transition from one to the next. We'll listen to make sure that it makes sense if it jumps around in any sort of order or repeats any particular cue. We want to look for consistency in the instrumentation. So all 3 of the main loops, well, actually, all 9 of the files, intros, main loops, and endings, they all need to contain the same instrumentation. It needs to sound like the same band is playing the same song. It needs to be all of them need to be in the same key, same tempo, same time signature, so that they maintain that consistency of the composition all the way through. So the part that's going to create the most change and difference is going to be the choice of notes, the rhythm, harmony, melody, making sure that you create changes in the main loops and create development over the course of the changes as it jumps from one to the next. You want to avoid repetition. You want to avoid where the first 4 bars and the second 4 bars sound the same in an 8-bar cue. We have 3 8-bar cues that are going to be repeating and sound repetitive enough by themselves. So you don't want to make it sound even worse by taking an 8-bar loop and making it 2 4-bar loops back to back, or an 8-bar loop that's 4 2-bar loops back to back. It'll be repetitive enough on its own by switching through these 8-bar loops. You want to use the entire 8 bars to develop all of your musical ideas. So that's instrumentation, composition, overall mix. Just visually, they look like they are the same level, same volume. We want consistency again across all of the main loops and the intros and endings. You ultimately do have control over the final mix of the game. So you can see that they are different from each other. Obviously, the different student submissions have different levels, but amongst the 3 of them, they are generally the same volume, same intensity. So since you have overall control or final control over the volume of the music and sound effects, then you can tweak that either in the DAW or when you put everything into Wise and you're actually playing the game. What you should probably do at some point is take all of your music and put it with all of your sound effects. Like either create a new session and put all of your bounced music files and bounced sound effects into the same session, or just dump all of your music files into your sound effects session, or your sound effects in your music sound effects files in your music session. Whichever way, at some point, put them together, listen to them at the same time, just to make sure that one versus the other is not crazy loud or very, very different in volume or intensity. You're looking for consistency, so that you generally want to be able to take all of the music versus all of the sound effects and balance them out, just as at least a starting point. You are going to have the best control over the volume and faders and the meters, and have the best kind of understanding of what's going on in your DAW. Wise has volume control. You have sliders, you have faders, you have meters, but they're just better overall. I don't want to say more accurate, but easier to interpret through like Logic or whatever your DAW is. So, as the main thing we're looking for is consistency, and looking across each of the group of 3 of these files, we can see some solid consistency in the mix. All right, let's look at intros. The intros need to build or rise into the main loops. They need to increase in intensity. They need to make sure that the end of an intro file can butt up against whatever main loop it ends up randomly transitioning into. The intros are meant to go from a lower intensity, build up all the way to the same intensity that you start with at the beginning of each one of these main loops. You are well served to start on the same chord at the beginning of each one of your main loops, probably the tonic, to start out your progression. So that means that you would probably hang on a 4 or 5 chord or some suspension to resolve to the tonic at the end of these intros. So they kind of hang there to resolve and drop down in the downbeat of the one of whichever main loop it is. So that also means don't end with the tonic at the end of an intro. It ends up sounding like an ending, and it then means it ends with on the tonic chord and then starts again on the tonic chord. So you want to avoid that. The intros need to have the same instrumentation as the main loops. Needs to feel like the same band is playing the same song. Any one of the intros needs to be able to connect or play transition to any one of the main loops. That's most of it. Obviously, we'll take a listen to how it sounds. Again, we're looking for consistency is the main thing as we go from intros to main loops to endings. All right, so the endings, most importantly, they need to end. So it looks like all of these files end, they actually reach silence. These 3 look like they get cut off by the end of the file. These 2 have a whole bunch of ending, unless there's like a whole bunch of reverb or cymbal crash or something in there, but probably you can just chop this down to, you want to save as much file size or file space as you can on a disk. So these look like they're all going to get reach silence, and these will just get cut off by the end of the file. So we want to watch out for that. Endings, most importantly, need to end. They need to resolve the musical idea. Whatever was happening in the main loops, you need to resolve the melody, the harmony, the bass line, and the drums. Drums will kind of do a final roll or fill to a crash, probably, or final hit. Bass line will resolve to the tonic. Chord progression will resolve back to the tonic, more than likely. And melody resolves back to tonic. Everything hits in the last note, last chord. Other things, other ways you can handle it with the ending cues. You also have to remember that you've lost the game at that point. You've lost the round. So maybe you don't resolve to the tonic. Maybe you resolve to some crazy dissonance or hit or impact or some sort of falling notes or glissando or something like that. So you have a little bit more room to do some interesting kind of weird stuff with the endings. To have a little bit more fun and sort of lean into the fact that the player has lost the round at that point. Same instrumentation, same key, same tempo, time signature. All that stuff should fits for the sake of consistency. But that's most of the things that we're going to listen to, or we can see visually. Obviously, none of that matters until we listen to it. So let's go ahead and take a listen to the first main loops. Here we go. Excellent work. Lots of fun through the changes of each one of these cues. I like the instrumentation. I like the energy, kind of the bounce to it. It's kind of bounce to it overall. Kind of really fun melodic progressions through each one. A constant energy through each. So the main thing maybe to comment on, I guess, would be the mix, because it threw me off in the beginning understanding where the melody is and where the harmony is. So the first one here, the melody is definitely on the xylophone there. And you have the tuba kind of bouncing back and forth, and I think the trumpet's down there. Is the piano, I guess? I think the main thing is, on this first one, it feels like it's missing the harmony. Like you have the bass and the trumpet line is there in the background, but it's kind of bouncing against this kind of syncopated feel against the tuba. Yeah, tuba. And then you got the xylophone or marimba kind of dancing around on top. The piano's in there, but I don't know, it feels very far back in the mix, or like there's this gap. I hear drums, right? I do hear drums, right? Yes, I hear drums, bass, and melody, and it feels like there's a gap in between. That's the main thing. Then I get to this, and the melody has switched from the xylophone over to the trumpet line, but mix-wise, the xylophone's still way out front. So maybe bringing that back a little bit more and bringing out the piano. I don't know if it's just the frequency or the range of it to have it stick out. And then the piano comes out much stronger here. But the intensity of the piano and trumpet and xylophone all competing against each other makes this cue very, not loud, but like much more intense than what is happening in the main loop. So when I jump back to one, the intensity comes down very strongly. Okay, so if I go over here. You can even see in the waveforms, everything kind of takes a step back in intensity and volume. So I think it's mostly the mix. Compositionally, have all the fun parts working against each other, and it is just kind of figuring out where the spotlight is and putting that lead instrument out front, backing up everything a bit more, although I think the piano's too far back in at least the first one. So, yeah, it works very well. I think the aesthetic works nicely for the game. Even here, you can see this one looks a lot louder than the first two. Let's see. Oh yeah, that bass drum is very, very loud. I want to separate these out a little bit. Yeah, watch the rolling snare as it crosses over. You're going to have to make sure that it doesn't sound like it gets cut off. Let's see. Oh, come on. Get over there. Come on. Yeah, that snare kind of just gets a bit cut off as it transitions. I like what the xylophone's doing there. That one works, and then this just booms. Big bass drum. All right, last one. Endings here. Or not. Tempo-wise. Yep. Yeah, I'm going to just see. I guess since it's the ending, it may not matter as much. I guess maybe it's just the swing to it. All right, so I think rhythmically or just consistency, the ending number 2 fits with that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it might be that listening to ending 1 and 3 in the context of the game, as all of this stuff is switching around, it might sound fine, but something to investigate as it all comes together. So again, instrumentation works very well. Compositionally, I think all of the elements work nicely together. You have to make sure a little bit as the instrumentation kind of jumps from one cue to the next about the consistency as it transfers from one to the next. Actually, do this. All right, so it's not like this one. The intro one is more for the marimba or the xylophone. The second one, it would be more for the trumpet, and the third one is more for the piano. That's not what is happening, and that's good. So that it doesn't matter which one of these goes into these, even though these are very strongly themed with the different instruments, that will work. So those are the kinds of things that I'm hearing. I think it works very well for the context of the game. So let's go ahead and check out the next one here. And we will start with our main loops. like the it's very like heroic, very major and powerful, and the hero comes to save the day to defend against the alien invasion. So I think the energy works. I think the kind of the driving intensity of the bass and the drums works nicely, and there's a fun melody from the guitar on top. So I think the instrumentation works. I think everything fits and transitions from one to the next, nicely going through each of the cues. There's changes in the drums, the progression, and I think the horn lines work very well to kind of support that guitar melody. So not too much to complain about there. I think everything fits, will work nicely in the game. It'll loop and should transition, and doesn't. You can kind of get lost in the music, which is good. Listening to them, they are consistent enough that you would just kind of lose yourself. You wouldn't know where you were in the music because it all feels similar enough that you can just kind of jump around, especially if you can jump around on different bars or beats. Then, it works well to transition and move through the game. Let's do 3 intros. All right, they all build nicely. You're using all of the instrumentation to create that rise or build. It's not just the drums, or it's not just the guitar line that kind of goes and feels like it has this rising intensity to it. You're using like the first bar and the second bar well to create more energy. Right here now the snare is all building up through the second bar. It's climbing up to the next chord, and the way the guitar line falls with the horn, all those work nicely. And then these look like they're all going to resolve. Let's take a listen. All right, now I'll resolve strongly back to the tonic. You got the horn kind of swell at the end. Kind of tag, and they are all different enough from each other that you're not repeating the same phrase. But they are common enough to each other that it shouldn't matter at all. And you shouldn't really be able to tell which intro goes to which main loop or which ending. Let's see if we can just try one here. Well, Logic didn't line those up perfectly, but I think everything will work. Everything will play back nicely in the game. You have that proper invisibility as it transitions between the different pieces of music. So I think it'll work nicely when you get everything into the game, and it'll be interesting to hear all of the transition and changes. Nice work. All right, let's do one more of these. We'll start out again with the main loops. Just listen to the drums in each one of them. Okay, so I think the production works very well. I think, again, they transition nicely. They do kind of stick out more from one to the next, meaning that you can identify where you are in the music. And I think a lot of it might come from the sound of the drums, and that's what I was listening to. Like the sound of the kick and snare changes along with the pattern. I don't know if it's like you're using a different snare of the same kit, but since the pattern changes pretty strongly and the sound of the drums, the harmony and bass line and the melody sound similar. It just sounds like the drum kit and the patterns are changing a bit too much. So create a bit more consistency there, which will help when these transition from one to the next, and again, make that a bit more invisible. I might watch out compositionally for the repetition in the melody. So when you do things like da 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 da, and then it kind of does the same sort of phrasing, the same pattern in the first half and the second half. Now, you do change like the chord that it's working against, but the patterns are very kind of similar and very I don't know if I'm going to say repetitive, but they're kind of the same shape, common shape between the first half and the second half of those, and then it changes up, but it does something similar. So you are now moving with a different rhythm and a different pattern of notes, but it then is consistent all the way through here, which is the stuff, I guess when I refer to the fact that it is a bit more obvious as where you are in the music, you can kind of latch on to that repetition to know that I've switched from 1 to 2 to 3. I might not know that it's 1 or 2 or 3 or which one is which, but I know when it comes back and I hear that repetition, I know where I'm at. So it's like being familiar with where you are driving around. You want to constantly not really know where you are musically, or at least the player doesn't, so they don't want to hear the same thing, a familiar thing, go around and around. So compositionally, watch out for a bit for the repetition, but production-wise, what's going on, drums, bass, harmony, melody, it sounds nice and it works well for the context of the game. I would just kind of tidy up that with the repetition in the melody, but then too much change in the sound of the drums and the pattern changes. Intros. Alright, so they sound a bit too similar to each other because you're kind of doing it's where you got a hi-hat, hi-hat or shaker, kind of waiting there in suspense for things to build up, on the chord, kind of melody slowly creeping up. And there is a drum fill, but the drum fills all seem quite far back. They need to be much more present up front to help that energy, help build things up. So they almost sound like they could be 2-bar loops. Like if I sat here as a loop, it makes sense. And it just kind of go around. When an intro shouldn't make sense as a loop. It would feel like it would build and build and build and then fall and build and fall. So you want to avoid that approach. You want to create more intensity, more build-up in the second bar. And then with the 3 endings, the main thing is you're going to want them to end. So you don't need to use the entire 2 bars. You can end a little early, which is kind of what you're doing here. The best places to end are beat 1 of bar 2 and beat 3 of bar 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3. Like you have there. You just need to finish the chord, which is a little bit more difficult because the pad that's playing in the background is this big full frequency pad that's just would sustain forever. So you're going to need to figure out a way with either reverb or delay or fade out or something to actually make it end. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3. So either end on beat 1 of bar 2 or beat 3 of bar 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2. Or 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3. You just don't need the last couple of beats of those, and just make sure, kind of like these up here, that you find a way to end and resolve the piece, resolve it to silence before it actually gets cut off in the file. Because what will happen in the game is it'll sound something like this and just kind of shut off. So, couple of things overall to take a listen to. Also listen to it in the context of the game. Listen to it when everything's plugged in. And a lot of these things will make themselves known as you listen to and play back in the game. So good submissions overall. Lots of good stuff to talk about. Again, I hope this encourages all sorts of folks to submit for the next round. The more that we have to listen to, the better off, the more opinions we have and the more stuff we have to talk about. So we're going to turn it over to the archive now, which will have a discussion of the new assignments for week 2. If you have any questions or comments about the assignments from week 1 or feedback from that, or what's coming up with the new assignments for week 2, please reach out. You can send me an email or a message on FSO. I'll be back again on Wednesday. On our Wednesday classes, we do have open sessions. Come prepared with anything you want to take a listen to before you want to submit it, or any questions about the assignments or topics or anything like that. We'll be able to discuss that in the open session on Wednesday. Other than that, thank you very much, and I will see you again next time. All right, let's go ahead and discuss the new assignments for week 2. So we have a new project. We have a new game. We have a new soundtrack. A new style of game requires a new approach to the music. And so our game this week is called Angry Bots, and it is a demo that is provided by Unity Games. Again, this game is built in the Unity game engine. Next week, in week 3, we'll start talking more about the technology, and we'll discuss game engines and audio middleware and some of the software and tools that are kind of running all of this stuff in the background. And like I've said before, saying like game engine is like saying DAW, kind of, sort of, not really, but sort of. Basically, in the same way that a DAW is the tool that you use to make music, a game engine is the tool that a game developer uses to make a game. And just in the same way that there's Logic and Pro Tools, and they give away free projects and like, here's some recorded music for you to check out and test out how our software works. They do the same thing with games. They can provide versions of the games that people can tear apart, and we can get in there with our music and sound effects. So our new game for this week is a different style of game, different approach to gameplay overall. In Angry Bots here, you are this mercenary infiltrating a robot factory. The robots are none too happy that you're there, and they are bent on your destruction, so they will come after you. And your job is to kind of go further and further into the game world. This is a much more complete game. There is more stuff going on. Let's see here. Where am I? More stuff going on than 2D platformer, or more like there's like a beginning, a middle, and an end. Where 2D platformer, the score would just go up and up and up. This one, there is like an ending to it. You can actually beat the level. It's not a full game. It's just like one level of what would be a much larger game. But it takes about 5 or 10 minutes to complete the first time. And this one is kind of a much more futuristic, techy designed world. Lots of kind of sci-fi influences, robots and explosions and lasers and rocket launchers and sliding doors and technology and all sorts of interesting things for music and sound design. It's not probably an all ages, family friendly kind of game. Much more kind of dark and intense. And our main focus with the music is the idea of ambient and action, switching back and forth between lower intensity ambient music and higher intensity action music. And when I talk about ambient music, I don't really mean the style or genre of ambient music. Not like Brian Eno, music for airports, kind of just a slow drone that never changes, never does anything. Ambient just means less than action. Sometimes it's known as battle and exploration. But this is the idea of there's a period of time in the game where you're just kind of wandering around the level trying to figure out what's going on. And lots of games do this, where there's a period of time where you're exploring and then all of a sudden an enemy jumps out and there's battle music. And the battle ensues for a particular period of time, and then you either win or lose the battle, and you move forward from that. So same sort of thing here. We have to, if you did nothing else in the game, if you just sat there in a corner and hid forever, you would hear this ambient piece of music. Ambient doesn't mean just a drone, just kind of slow and boring. It can have energy to it. It can have good instrument layers to it. It can have drums and bass and harmony, maybe even melody, but probably we'll leave that up for other pieces of music. But it can have structure to it. It can have development, and it really shouldn't just be one slow drone that doesn't do anything and just sits there. So there would be an ambient piece of music until a battle happens. And when one of the battle happens, one of these robots comes out to attack. And you'll notice that the battles are pretty short, right? So this guy wakes up, he comes to attack, you only hit him a couple of times, and he explodes. This guy comes to attack, and I kind of toy around with him a little bit, run away, let him chase you. And eventually, you'll either destroy the bad guy or the robot, or they will destroy you. And whenever these battles happen, the action music comes in. And then when the battle is over, the action music will leave and return back to just the ambient music. The ambient layer or the ambient cue will always be there, will always be playing. And when you fight one of these robots, then the corresponding piece of action music will come in. There are 3 different types of robots, and each one of them has a different action cue or action theme that's attached to it. And whenever you battle that particular robot, you will hear its action theme. And then when you defeat that robot, that theme will eventually go away. It'll fade out. So you have an ambient cue, and then you have 3 action cues that represent each of the different robots. They can play at the same time and will play at the same time. So you will, no matter wherever you are in the game, you will always be hearing the ambient cue. Then one of these battles starts and the corresponding action cue comes in. So we have to understand, how do we add or subtract this action music whenever we want. That's one of the main challenges here. We have to be able to get into a higher intensity action piece of music and then return back to the ambient piece of music as seamlessly and invisibly as possible. So, how does the game know when a battle is happening? And the answer to that is it uses health points. It uses you have health points, and the characters have health points. You might not notice, but this yellow bar on his back is actually a game meter or a health meter, and it tells you how long it takes. A lot to destroy you in the game because it's mostly just to test out and have fun with it. And defeating one of these robots doesn't really take all that much time. So we'll have to discuss how we get back and forth between this lower intensity ambient music and higher intensity action music. Let me explain each one of the robots. The first one here is called the Buzzer Bot. This is the kind of flies around, is sort of annoying. It zaps you with these little lightning bolts. These guys are called the Spider Bots. They're basically bombs on legs. They come after you, and if they get close enough, you'll either destroy them, or if they get close enough, they'll self-destruct. They really don't do much except for chase you around and become annoying. These are the most frequent kind of robots on the map. There's another one over here. And let's go inside here. So, and then here is the third robot. This guy's called the Mech Bot. It's this big RoboCop-looking robot coming down the way here. These I would kind of consider like a mini boss. They're kind of harder to destroy. You have to unload into them to eventually defeat them. And then there's just the same robots across the rest of the map. The good thing with the music and sound is we really only have to focus. I mean, you really are you see everything in the beginning of the level, and all of your music and sound effects will be populated through the rest of the game. So let's go ahead and bring up some of the other material. Let's see. Here's the PDF that you get. Hello? Is that not working? Shrink down. There you go. Okay. So here's the PDF you get. It discusses all sorts of different aspects of the composition of the project. You have action and ambient cues. Why do I keep turning away? There we go. You have action and ambient cues and a discussion of each one of those. How to play Angry Bots, hopefully, should be relatively straightforward, not too difficult to control. You can use the arrow keys to go up, down, left, and right. You can use the mouse to look around and then left click or just click on your trackpad to fire. There's a couple of listening tracks as reference. Different classic games in the style of this kind of sci-fi action game. Musical style. Here we're really looking and focusing on intensity. We want to make sure that whenever those robots come after you, that it's really powerful and strong and intense. You need to feel like the danger of these robots coming to attack. Nothing too chill, nothing too laid back. Sometimes I hear some music and it's like, hey, robots aren't so bad. Let's go ahead and have a cup of coffee or something like that. And they're like, yeah, sure, that's no problem. Which is not what you want. You want intense and strong and loud, and robots are chasing you around with lasers and missile launchers and all sorts of crazy sci-fi sort of stuff. So you want to match that aesthetic. On the other side of that is another thing that I get that is better, but it doesn't work too well, is like Robot Dance Party, where everything is like super hypey dance and not that dark or intense. It's like party time, and that doesn't necessarily work either. So intense and strong instrumentation. I have suggested instrumentation, synths and pads and driving bass lines, gated effects, sweeping filters, bouncing delays, fast percussion, heavy distorted guitars, big fast drums, large brass and strings, cymbal swells and impacts, anything that portrays strength and intensity. Then there's descriptions of each one of the cues, which is basically what I'm discussing now, and how they'll play back. What I really want to get to is the asset list down here. There's screenshots and descriptions of each one of the robots and how they should sound, and just a general overview. Then the asset list. There's a total of 7 files that you will create for this. I mentioned 4 of them so far: the ambient cue, buzzer action, spider action, and mech action. They're each going to be 1 to 2 minutes long, and they will loop 16-bit 44:1 stereo. So don't think about this as 4 individual 2-minute long compositions. Think about it as one composition that can be broken down into 4 parts or 4 stems. So each one of these layers is going to contain unique instrumentation. You shouldn't repeat any instruments between the different cues, so that when you hear those particular groupings of instruments, or that thematic line or melody or instrument, whatever it is, you can recognize whatever robot's coming after you. You almost train the player with the music so that they can hear what's coming up next. So let me explain how these 4 files work, and then I'll get into these short stingers here. So when the game starts, if nothing else is going on, you are always hearing the ambient cue. Through the entire game, that 2-minute long ambient cue will be looping around and around. The ambient cue should be subtle. It shouldn't be too much in your face. It can still have a bit of rhythm to it. It doesn't need to have strong percussion, but it can maybe have some hi-hats, or a arpeggiated bass line, or some sort of gated effect that will foreshadow the rhythm that's coming. And you should you want to lay down the foundation of the progression. This is going to map out how things are going to play back in the how all the layers are going to play back together. All right, so we hear the ambient from the beginning of the game. As soon as you've been attacked, you either shoot the robot or the robot shoots you, then the action music will come in. The action music will come in immediately. It will start playing from wherever it is in the loop, and you will hear action music. This point, you need the strong percussion. You probably need a couple of layers of percussion, bass line, harmony, and probably a thematic. I don't necessarily want to say instrument, like a melody, but thematic thematic line or thematic instruments, or something that tells you what robot is coming after you, so that you can give that sort of information and help the player. All right, so first guy, the battle starts, and as soon as he's destroyed, the battle ends. The music's going to start fading out at that point. Then these guys jump awake, the spider music will start, and as soon as they're destroyed, it'll stop playing and it'll fade out over time. So let's go ahead and load up some examples here. Talk my way through a couple of examples of what this might sound like. There we go. All right, so as stated before, you are going to have 4 2-minute, somewhere between 1 to 2 minute long cues or layers, or even maybe think of them as stems, that can play back together. and play at the same time. The biggest challenge here is going to be dissonance and clashing notes. You want to make sure that there's a lot of similarities between these cues. They need to all start at the same time. They need to end at the same time. They need to be in the same key, in the same tempo, and same time signature, and they need to all loop together. They need to follow a common chord progression. Because even if they're in the same key, if they're all headed to different chords at the same time, it's going to probably not work so well. So you need to, with all of the things that are the same, key, tempo, time signature, looping, starting, stopping, the things that are going to be unique are your choice of instrumentation. Each cue should have unique instrumentation that's only found in that cue. You really shouldn't repeat any instrument lines. You shouldn't copy anything, because when the game puts it all back together, it's going to double things up. Like if you have the same drum pattern in multiple cues, when you play them all together, then that drum pattern is 4 times as loud as everything else. So make sure that you have unique instrumentation, and then a unique composition. Each cue should have certainly a strong rhythm. That's going to be the most of the action part. And then a thematic melodic line, or thematic instrument, or thematic phrase, or something like that, that helps identify whatever robot it is. Probably a bass line to help, although you don't need necessarily a bass in all 4 of them. A chord progression, but you don't also need to put all of the voicing of every single chord in each one of the cues, right? So you write your chord progression, you're going to have 3 or 4 voices per chord. Well, all 4 of these don't need to have all 4 voices every single time. Maybe one of them is just the root, follows the foundation. Another one, you've got the 3rd and the 5th. Maybe another one, you get the 1st and the 5th, if you've got 7ths in there. And you can start, if you write out the chord progression first, you have a basic common structure or skeleton to work from. So let's go ahead and check this out. Just get started here. Let's play. Start with the ambient cue. All right, I am going to I'm going to play the part of the game, just mixing these up and down. And the whole reason this thing is going to work in the game is because when the game starts, all 4 of these pieces of music are going to start, and they're going to play together. They're going to reach the end and all loop together, so they're going to constantly be in sync. The only thing is, the player's only going to hear this first one at the beginning. The 3 others are going to be silent. Then the buzzer comes in. So let's do this. Game starts. Game starts, and you hear just the ambient cue. And then once you get attacked here, that's the buzzer bot, and so the buzzer music will immediately come in. And you're going to hear that buzzer music as long as the battle's going on. And then once you defeat that robot, it's going to start fading out. And the game is going to do this a whole lot better than I can and control it in the DAW. But it's going to fade that out. And whenever that robot attacks, that music comes in. So this is the buzzer by itself. So we've added the low strong strings. You got some big timpani hits in there, big low bass drums, and there's these little white noise sweeps somewhere, I think, in here. There you go. So it adds a little bit of layers. So this ambient cue is mainly made up of, has a hi-hat pattern in it, but mostly is a chord progression. This is outlining the chord progression. No, it's a couple of notes that are just kind of presenting the foundation of that chord progression. Here in the chat, it says, so that means we're making tracks separate, so that means the music can't clash. Yeah, you are probably best to think about it as one whole composition. So what I end up doing in my composition session is I'll set up a region just like this, like a particular length that depends on your tempo of your music, and you'll count out how many bars will fit, how many bars you want to use that will fit with between 1 to 2 minutes, and then just start adding instruments. I would often start out with a basic just piano. Just start writing your chord progression, even though it's going to end up probably very synthetic and very electronic and all that sort of stuff. Start out with a piano or a basic keyboard patch. Write out your chord progression, maybe write a few melodies that could work with it, figure out what instruments you're going to use, and then just keep stacking them on top of each other so that it becomes one cohesive composition. But eventually they're going to be bounced out separate from each other so that the game can use them individually as it needs to. All right, so that is the buzzer. And once that buzzer is defeated, it eventually fades away, back to the ambient. And then you go after the next one. So this spider pops up. When that spider pops up, the music is going to immediately add in the spider cue. It sounds like this. Hi-hat, bass line, a little melodic line that we'll hear is actually a double of the mech cue. Here it is with the ambient. And then this guy's destroyed. This guy chases around a little bit. When that guy's gone, the music will fade out. Until you get after this guy. And this guy is the mech bot. And he comes and he attacks, and it sounds like this. So with that one, you've got strong brass and strings. You basically have the high strings to match the low strings from the buzzer cue. You've got a strong lead melody. This one, where's it coming? Right about here. And you also have the ability to have 2 or even all 3 robots on the screen at the same time. So we could bring in the buzzer cue. Bring in the spider cue. And all 4 of these cues should be able to play together. No clashing notes, no clashing rhythms. Again, think about it as one cohesive composition that with multiple layers that can play at the same time. There are 3 other files that are listed in the asset list. The music buzzer stinger, the spider stinger, and the mech stinger. And those are there to help the transitions from the ambient into the action. The action cues are going to hit quickly, and you do not know where they're going to be in the music. So to help this transition, we add in stingers. And stingers are going to play when the action cue is introduced. So let me give you an example here. I'm going to divide this up like how it will sound in the game. Just kind of set this up so everything is set up correctly. Something like that, something like this. And then we'll put fades. So we got a fade out there, and fade out there, and fade out there. All right, so when the buzzer action comes in, when it comes in here, you'll notice that the buzzer, it'll come in probably in the middle of some phrase somewhere, doesn't have a strong impact, just kind of jumps up. So, oh, I was actually at the end of a sweep there. That's actually kind of luckier than it typically is. Turn off my fade there. Thank you. Let's play that again. So it just comes in there. And so to hide that sudden transition, we can throw stingers in here. And the game, again, the game's going to do this all for you. A stinger should hit have a strong impact at the front and fade out to silence very quickly. It's meant to distract and create a little bit of interest at that whatever the random point that's going to transition. Provides a little bit of consistency, even though it is kind of just going to be a random point. If you're familiar with electronic music and like drops and impacts and things like that, that is commonly what a stinger could be. Stingers are typically have a strong impact, maybe some low end, maybe it could be a drop. And then there's another layer or two on top of what I call like some modulation or some filtering or a pitch drop or a filter sweep or a synth arpeggiator or something like that. These are all kind of strong impacts. They should not be tonal. They should not be rhythmic, because since you don't know where they're going to be played, it might clash. So strong hit, lots of reverb, tails out to silence. There's another one. And like I said, they are there to cause a bit of distraction as you're going from one piece of music to the next. So here's what it might sound like when played against the action cues. And again, the game does all of this for you. You just have to create the material. So it should provide a hit, and then the one should fade out, and the other piece of music will already be there. Here's another one. third one. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of where to start with the composition. I'm going to play one more here. Let's get rid of that and this and this. All right, here's another ambient cue. So this would be a good example. This would be a good example to say that the ambient cue doesn't need to be boring. It doesn't need to not move or do any or have any changes to it. Here you can hear the outline of the chord progression. You hear a arpeggiated phrase. You hear some percussion, but it's not like a kick, snare, hi-hat pattern. It is sporadic and meant to provide emphasis. Here is the buzzer cue. Here it is by itself. So it follows along. It's got a little melodic line to it. It's got drums. That's probably the most important thing to add for the action cue. Here's a spider. This one's mostly drum kit. Mostly drum kit, got a lot of crash cymbal in there. And here's the mech. Mech sounds cool. It almost sounds like an alarm going off. You definitely have to watch out when all four of these are playing to make sure it doesn't completely overload the master. But a common progression, a common pace, a common rhythm to it that allows each one of these layers to be added and subtracted at any point. Then the game, whenever a new idea comes into play, it can just fade in the corresponding piece of music as necessary. So hopefully that helps in describing how the composition is going to be set up. I do want to show off a couple of things with the sound effects for the sound design this week. Please let me know if you have any questions as we go along, or if you're just watching the archive, then you can send me a message if you need any sort of clarification. So that's the compositional side of things. You also have the sound design, creating sound effects for Angry Bots, 22 sound effects. Again, this is, like I said before, because it's a little futuristic and robots and weapons and things like that, explosions, there's a lot of fun opportunity for sound design. So let me just load up the sound effects. And I would suggest that you do something similar to last time, where you would load the original sound effects into Logic and use them as reference. So let's see, I'll close down this session. Don't save. Get a brand new session here. Now, when you go download this assignment, you are going to get a folder that looks like this. It's called Angry Bots Original Sound Effects. And you unzip it, and it's gonna have two folders. One is called to replace, and the other one is called to use. There's a total of 60 some odd sound effects in the game, and I don't require you to do all of them. You can use some of the original ones to supplement them. So the one that's called to replace, these contain the 22 sound effects from the original. These do contain the original sound effects, but these are the ones that you will have to do for the assignment. And the reason is these are the more interesting, sound designy kind of sounds, if that really makes any sense. They are the more obvious weapons and robot kind of sound effects. The ones to use, these are some ambiances and interior shots. Then there's like bullet impacts and ricochets, and then there's also footsteps. So you're probably not going to win any awards off of your footstep design. You're not going to get hired off of your ricochet. Well, who knows? Maybe you would. But more likely, this is a focus on the music and the and more important sound effects. So, something to consider, but we definitely are going to do and replace to replace. I include the other ones there because you can and are encouraged to do all of it, so that whenever you show this off, you can say, I did everything in this game. Otherwise, some of the original sound effects will be there still. But let's just use the to replace folder. I'm going to take all of these sound effects and I'm going to drag them onto a track here in Logic. Open, place all the files on one track, yes. It always comes up with, actually this one doesn't. If it comes up and asks you if you need to change your sample rate, just change the sample rates of the files, that's fine. You're going to bounce them out anyway. All right, then once you have the original sound effects on here, you would probably spend some time, you'd probably clean this up a little bit. They don't need to be right on top of each other. So take these and separate them out a bit. Oh, that didn't work. Well, Logic, come on. You can cooperate with me. There we go. Do that. Do that. And you don't need to watch me do all of these. But just trust me. Separate them out a little bit so that there's a little gap in there. So when you bounce everything, you have a little room. Then you would create a couple of blank tracks down below. And build all of your sound design directly below the original sounds. But listen to the sounds as reference for what they should sound like, how loud they should be, what's the shape or like the waveform look like, how loud is it, how long is it, just the basic properties of that file. And then you would build your own sound effects down below. I'm going to cheat here and just drag these down. You would not do this. Don't do this. This is a bad idea. But basically, if I were to fake it, these would be all of my effects. And you definitely mute out the originals when you bounce. You don't want the original files in there. They're really obvious to hear. And you have, then you'd bounce these out and you'd have your sound effect. And you'd go through and design all of these. Let me actually play these. I think this is going to work. Let's see if these broadcast. Airlock door close. That did not work. Hold on. How about this? Let's try that again. There it goes. Okay, this is airlock door close. There are a lot of doors in the game, and there are all the Star Trek kind of doors that open and slide open and close and do all that stuff. So there's a door open. There's a door close, and the assignment has pictures of everything, so you can play through the game. You can see what's what. A lot of times you can get away with the close just being the reverse of the open. Maybe there's a little like chunk, like ka-chunk at the end as it locks closed. But with these, you can use with hydraulics, pneumatics, servos, motors, those kind of things give you those kind of great mechanical sounds. Ambience, exterior rain. It's a rain loop. 30 seconds. Yours doesn't have to be that long, but just a consistent rain clip that you'll hear when you're outside of the robot factory. Interior hum. This is when you go in. This is like room tone. I always think that sounds like the inside of a spaceship or something. Like, as if I knew what the inside of a spaceship sounded like, but I'm sure. Something like that. Flying buzzer destroyed. There's a lot of sound effect. There's a lot of explosions. So the two main things in the game are, not main things, but things that have a lot of sounds are doors, opening and closing, and explosions. So what I would suggest that you do when you go do the sound design is you should be familiar with like the Westar Music Library to get access to sound effects there. There's another resource called freesound.org, which is a website. It's kind of a community-driven website. Westar is great because it has a whole bunch. It has the sound ideas library, which is a great, like, very high quality sound effects library. Freesound.org is community driven. There are lots and lots of sound effects on there. There's also lots and lots of very bad sound effects that are not worth anything. But there's also some very good stuff in there. And for the types of things you're trying to do, a lot of that stuff can be covered there also. So what I would do is say, okay, I need explosions. So go off and search for a whole bunch of explosions, bring them back in, and then combine them all together to make the sounds that you need. Don't work on one sound at a time. Don't say, I need a flying buzzer explosion. Go find an explosion, bring it back, edit it, name it, bounce it. Then go, oh, I need a mech explosion. Then go back out, get another file, bring it back in, edit, name it, format. Like, that takes too long to go back around and around and around like that. Do it in chunks. A lot of times when I do sound design, I'll spend one day just looking through sounds. Like, just go find my library of whatever it is. And I'll just go, here's 25 sounds that I'll eventually put all together. Then maybe the same day or maybe the next day, I'll go back and I'll just edit everything. Put them all together, layer them up, see what works. Then often, if there's time, I might have another day that's just like mixing and bouncing and formatting and delivery, like finalizing everything. So if you work in big chunks like that, it often makes the process a bit easier. This is Zap Electric. This is when the lightning bolt kind of shoots out and zaps you. Mech Alert. All of the robots have an alert sound when they recognize that you're there. They kind of wake up and attack. So there's kind of an alarm sound there. Mech Destroyed Explosion. It's an absolutely huge sounding explosion, which is good for that very large mech robot. These are patrol mech footsteps. As that thing is walking down the hallway, you will hear these footsteps for footstep 1, footstep 2. I think they completely cheated and used the same sounds. You could probably make it a little bit more interesting than that. Missile explosion. So this is when it fires at you. So it shoots its missiles at you, which is this shoot missile sound. So it fires them, and then it either hits you or hits a wall or something like that and explodes. The spider alert. Right? So a little couple of beeps as it wakes up. You don't have to do exactly the same thing. Just kind of do some other stuff. I've heard very cool things where people have done like vocoded robot voices when these things like wake up and it goes attack or something like that. Spider destroyed explosion. These are the bombs on the... That's when you destroy it. This is when it self-destructs. I think that is a horrible explosion sound. It's a real big letdown compared to the other explosions. Proximity. This is when the spider bots are coming after you. They beep. And it's very important. Just make that one little beep. And you don't want it to be very long, because what happens is as it gets closer to you, the beep gets faster and faster. It goes beep, 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 beep. And so if you have like a long sound, that's just going to stack up and sound all sorts of crazy. So all you really need is one really short sample. Spider self-destruct, that's the bad explosion. Interior doors open and close. These are the Star Trek doors that slide open and closed. I always think that sounds like somebody's window being rolled up or down. Locked door opening. Once you get, you stand next to these computer terminals and you hack the computers, and it allows these locked doors to open. Player death. This is when you die. That's not true. That's a gunshot. That is the incorrect sound. Let me get that out of there. Player hit. This is when you take damage. Player shooting. This is the gunshot sound. It's pretty important with that sound. That is going to be a looping sound. And it is important that you match the timing of those shots, because I think it matches the animation or the muzzle flash in the game, which is this. So this is player shooting. Oh, muted. Right, so that's just a loop going around and around. You would probably be best served 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There's 12 in here. Just build your shots right below that and just use the same timing so that it creates this kind of smooth loop overall. And the last one is, I think it's the last one. Yeah, terminal hacked. Right, just some sort of electronic sound as the terminal is being hacked. I've heard people like typing on their computers, or it sounds like a keyboard, or there's a voice in there that says terminal hacked. I don't know why a computer would tell you it's been hacked, but whatever. So that hopefully, again, will give you a good direction for your sound design. Always make sure that you mute out the original track. Don't include the original sound effects in there. Create 22 sound effects for Angry Bots. And I think that should be it. That's certainly quite enough for me for this afternoon. We did the peer review of the submissions, which was always great. Again, it hopefully encourages everybody to submit also for next round. And then we talked about your Angry Bots and your Angry Bots music and sound design. So if you have any questions, go ahead and post them up in the chat, or send me a message. But other than that, let's go ahead and wrap it up there. And I'll see you again on Thursday. All right. Thank you very much.